Hello and welcome to this week's video. My name is Anuska. So great to have you here. So this week's topic is something a little bit different, and I wanted to talk about this idea of just be yourself. And I'm sure you've all heard this before. In terms of public speaking, presentation skills, communication skills, often a tip that's given is just be yourself. And how hard is it to just be yourself, and what does it even mean? And I think it's something that really holds people back, because one of the reasons people find it so hard to just be themselves is because they think they are being themselves. And it's like, well, this isn't working for me. I'm not getting the engagement I want. So what am I missing? What is going on here? So that's what I want to talk about today. Now, I myself do talk about this from a sort of authentic voice perspective. If you go on my website, you'll see I refer to authenticity as a speaker. And I approach this from two different angles. So I do talk about it from the sort of physiological, technical angle of the voice. And in my work, that is about freeing your voice, because often we don't realize how many brakes we put on our voice from a sort of muscular perspective, how we tighten muscles that don't allow the voice out, how certain muscles aren't strengthened that allow the voice to function really well, and how other muscles are so tight they literally sort of stuff the voice. So that is, from my perspective, the vocal side of it, which I talk about in other videos. But in today's video, I want to talk about this from the sort of psychological perspective. And my work is based on the Jungian psychology approach. So that is going to be where I'm coming from today in what I want to talk to you about with this, because I think this is going to really help you to actually show up as yourself and actually genuinely be more authentic versus just pretending to be more authentic. Okay, if I do this and I do this, then I'm being authentic. The reason we think we're just being ourselves is because we are overly identified with our ego mind. And the ego mind being our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas, the stories we tell ourselves, the circumstances we see in the world around us. Well, that's how it's always been. That's what I've always done. So that's what's possible. This is what my mind is telling me. I can never be a speaker. I can never have this kind of voice. I can never do this. I can never do that. So that is what we believe to be true. But from my work, that is just the surface. And there's this whole other layer that's so much deeper. And a lot of personal development out there is based on this kind of surface idea of just bolstering the ego, just trying to make these thoughts a little bit better. So, trying to turn these negative thoughts into positive thoughts, which is better than nothing. But if you're someone like myself that's done personal development for more than a decade, probably more like 2 decades, I've always had an interest in personal development, you realize that it only actually gets you so far. It only takes you so far. And the reason it only takes you so far is because you're only working on the surface. And as my coach says, it's like you're rearranging the furniture. So you're not completely like dismantling the room and pulling the roof off and pulling down the walls and completely rebuilding the room. You're just moving the furniture around in the room. And that's why you don't really feel that much different. You might feel temporarily more confident or more authentic, but nothing really changes on any substantial level. Because truthfully, the real transformation happens in the unconscious. And that's why Jungian psychology has been so profound in my own life, in making incredible changes in my own life, and what I share with my private clients, particularly in terms of understanding why they might be holding themselves back. So in case you haven't heard of this term, the ego, before, from this perspective, we all have an ego. It's not a personality trait. It's a part of our mind. It's a function of our mind. And we need it. We need it for survival. You wouldn't be here without it. Its sole job is to help you survive. If you're watching this video and you've got a device to watch it on, you've got an internet connection, you've got a roof over your head, then most likely you've nailed that survival goal of the ego. So you actually are already doing very, very well because you're alive, you're functioning, and you're breathing. But this ego mind can be very, very limiting. So it absolutely helps us to survive, and we can stay stuck in that survival place. But that is a very, very limiting place to be, because there's this whole other world that's available to us if we can navigate it. So one of the ways the ego helps us to survive in the world is by the development of the persona. And the persona is really this sort of social mask we wear in the world. It's that kind of outward facing representative that we show to the world. And we have slightly different personas in different situations. So you go for a job interview versus you're talking to your partner at home or your pet or your child, you're probably going to be a slightly different version of yourself in each of those scenarios. Not drastically different, but you're going to bring a different representative to each of those scenarios. And this persona gets conditioned from a very young age, usually within our family dynamics or our communities, amongst our peers. And we learn from a young age what is going to help me fit in and survive. And this is going to look very different for every single person, because it's very, very dependent on your culture, your community, your upbringing. I mean, everything you've ever been taught is going into this. So from a voice perspective, because obviously that's my niche here, if you've been taught growing up, and I see this particularly with women that struggle to be more authoritative, if you've been brought up to believe that it's not okay to express anger, to express a difference of opinion, to even dare to rock the boat, you're probably going to have a hard time allowing your voice to be authoritative, powerful, and assertive. And so as a consequence, you may find that your voice is either very sort of quiet and gentle, or I see this a lot with women that I work with, that they will really hold the voice back. It will be really sort of sitting in their throat. It will be pushed down in their throat. There'll be a lot of raspiness and croakiness. Now, they won't know that that's what they're doing. They'll just think that their voice is a bit low or a bit croaky. They won't really understand and necessarily connect the dots. But when we start to explore it more, we do start to connect the dots. You know, you've developed this voice persona to survive, to basically help you fit in the world. So there's nothing wrong with that. But as I said, if you've got the survival game down, which most likely you have if you're watching this video, then we want to go to the next level of thriving and really allowing possibilities to come into our life. And part of that is allowing this true self to shine, this true full self to come out. And that means, if we're using this example of, you know, you've been taught that it's not okay to express anger, is to allow yourself to go towards that angry self, that more assertive self, that more authoritative self, and how that can show up in the voice. And what I find with women I work with on this is they really have a hard time allowing that authoritative, expressive voice to come out, because they've got so used to sort of stuffing their voice, keeping it very low, keeping it very monotone, keeping it just sort of flying under the radar so as not to sort of, you know, create any waves or upset anyone. But they have a real hard time with allowing the voice to come out in this more powerful way, which includes greater expression, which includes greater dynamics. Now, it's important to note with the ego, and this is where it can be particularly limiting, because you might think, well, what's so bad about me not being angry? I don't want to be angry. The thing with the ego is it will reject anything that could vaguely be perceived as angry. So it's not like I'm saying, I want you to now go around and scream and shout and yell at everyone on the street, but it could be you just actually having a difficult conversation with someone at work where you might have to be a little bit more assertive or a little bit more authoritative. That is going to be very, very challenging for this persona that you've created. So the ego is going to really, really, really push back and say, no, 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 that's dangerous. You can't do that. This person's going to hate you. You're going to lose your job. This is all terrible. You can't do this. So we start to then have this real internal conflict, because consciously we want to be more authoritative, but in the unconscious, there's this real deep fear of what will happen if I actually do start to become, let's say, more assertive and more authoritative. So that's really important to remember, because I remember struggling with this myself. And I'm going to give an example from my own life, which is actually kind of what we've been talking about here with the anger, because I think it's so common for women in particular. And you have to see that the ego is very much black and white, right, wrong, good, bad. There's no middle ground. There's no gray with the ego. It's like either you're angry or you're not. And actually, it's just thinking about all the things that you would associate with anger in a voice. And it's interesting, actually, because often when I'm working with private clients with this kind of persona who are trying to find more authority in the voice, often I will actually give them the cue of, okay, I want you to be more aggressive when you say this. Not because I want them to go out and start screaming at people, but because it activates something within them. It activates a different energy within their body and how they use their voice. And actually, what is so fascinating, and when they listen back, they always say this to me as well, they don't actually sound aggressive. They do not sound angry in the way their ego thinks it's going to sound. So this is where it's so limiting if we allow ourselves to stay on this ego persona level. And what we're talking about here, what we're pushing away, is in the shadow. And the shadow is unconscious. It's not limiting beliefs, because if you're aware of it, that's not it. So there's something underneath it. There's something you've got to keep peeling back the onion until you actually get to the root of what is this really about, because it's not about what you think it's about. It's never about what you think it's about. So this is where the work becomes really deep and really powerful, if you're willing to go there. And obviously it's not for everyone. Not everyone is willing to go there, because it is a challenge to the ego, and the ego will push back. And when the ego pushes back, one of its favorite tools to do this, and we can all relate to this, is projection. It will project it out onto the world. So it will either be in people that you criticize or people that you idolize. Either way, it's out there. It's nothing to do with me. It's either, oh my God, that person's amazing. I could never do that. I could never sing like that. I could never speak like that. Or it's, oh my God, I never want to be like that person. They're so angry. They're so aggressive. So however it shows up for you, it is projected outside of you as something that's got nothing to do with you. I'm just observing it. And this is, again, where I said the illusion of the ego. It believes that these things externally have absolutely nothing to do with you, whereas you're just seeing your own mind in 3D in the world around you. And it's really understanding that is so empowering. It's also a bit scary to start with, but it's so empowering, particularly when you're trying to find a more authentic voice and access your authentic voice. When we are living from this ego persona, we're spending all of our energy trying to uphold this persona and then push away the shadow. But we don't even really know that we're doing that, because we're projecting everything outside of ourselves. So just as an example from my own life, just to give you some context with this, I used to be very triggered, i.e. criticize angry people. Really used to get triggered by this on a massive level. And I've used this example before because it really drove my life in such a massive way. And whether it was people on TV, particularly people like Gordon Ramsay, because I've always loved cooking, and I was like, how can you talk to people like that? So people like that, but also in my own personal life, I would always seem to attract really angry people, like people that were really bitter or resentful about the world. And I'm like, why do I attract these people? I'm not like this. I'm just so gentle and loving and nurturing. But when I started to do this work, I realized that they were reflecting that shadow aspect of myself. And I was actually really suppressing this angry part of myself. So I was really just seeing this part of myself. I was really just seeing the shadow self. And I was really pushing away a lot of that energy, because I think in our society, we've made anger really bad. But it's really when we stuff anger that it's actually bad. That's when people do terrible things. That's when people commit hideous crimes and they're cruel and they're violent. It's really stuffed and suppressed anger, versus actually just allowing yourself to feel the anger within your own body and express it. You don't necessarily need the person there to express it, but maybe you do have to have a conversation, but it's not stuffing it. It's not running away from it. And that was such a powerful integrational moment for me when I was like, okay, because I'd been taught it was wrong, and I'd been taught it wasn't okay as a young girl to even vaguely express anger. So this stuffing of it really affected me for so many years. It affected the people that I noticed in my world around me. I got very triggered by it. I used to feel very critical of people. And so it really, really limited my life. And it actually limited my voice as well. Because I listen back to my voice, say 20 years ago, I'm like, oh my God, it's like not a different voice, but I have a lot more authority in my voice now than I used to. And that's partly because of this integration of this other part of myself, because it's all us basically. And then we can choose what we bring out. We can choose if we need to be authoritative, we can. If we want to be gentle and soft and nurturing, we can, but we're not afraid to be anything. And that's the really important point to make. But when we come from that kind of ego persona, we are afraid, we are hiding, and we're not being ourselves. So coming back full circle, this is the key. It's really allowing yourself to become your full self, your true self, which is the light and the dark, and the good and the bad, and the right and the wrong, and all of that, and not suppressing and not pushing away anything anymore, and allowing yourself to start to see things that you are seeing out in the world, particularly the people that trigger you, particularly the people that you want to criticize, particularly the people that you idolize as an aspect of yourself. So I hope that's made some sense to you. You can obviously post questions below if you have some questions on this, but I just want to give you some questions that you can go away now and journal about, which I hope will kind of help to start to open this up for you. Now, as already mentioned, the ego is going to resist this. The ego does not want you to do this work because it's created this nice safety mechanism for you for your whole life. So it's going to resist you doing this. So ideally, you want to be in the most relaxed place you can be, preferably with no distractions, where perhaps take some deep breaths, perhaps put some nice calming music on, set an environment up where you can just have that time to yourself. You might journal, or you might just sort of think about it. And then I'm going to give you these questions to reflect on. Because as Carl Jung said, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and we will call it fate. And that's what he's talking about, is this shadow self that we stuff, and then we think that these things are happening to us in the external. So when we can begin to integrate these two parts of ourselves that have been split away, that's when we truly show up as our authentic self, because we're not afraid to be perceived as anything anymore. We're just going to show up as we need to in that specific moment, whatever that moment calls for. So I've got 4 questions here, and I will post them below, so you don't have to go through the whole video to find them again. So the first question is, where do I stop myself, and where do I put the brakes on in my life? So I'll give you an example from the voice world. This is a common thing I hear a lot, is I could never sing. I'm just using this as an example because it's something people say to me all the time. I could never sing. And truthfully, if you really want to sing and you have the desire to sing, you have the means to do it. Unless you've got any serious pathology on your voice, or you're tone deaf, and I might just say only like 2% of the population are truly tone deaf, then you can sing. And if you really want to do it enough, you will find a way. And I've worked with so many people over the years, so I know this to be true. So that could be something that you have told yourself, no, can't do that, can't sing. So that's just an example. So I'm going to use that as my example going through. So where do you stop yourself? Where do you put the brakes on? So let's say you say, well, I can't sing. Can never be a singer, but I'd secretly like to. Okay, so question number 2, what do I have to become to step into that? And this is where we're starting to point to the shadows. So if we're using the example of I could never be a singer, again, assuming that you don't have any serious pathology on your voice and you're not clinically tone deaf, which most people aren't, there's something that you have to become, which is in your shadow, which is actually really why you don't want to do it, which is what's stopping you. So just think about it, and what's the first thing that comes into your head? And often for people with singing, it's often about being a performer and what it means to be a performer. So it could be that maybe you have a judgment around performers are arrogant or full of themselves or like to be center of attention and allowed. Or maybe it's just about having attention. So maybe there's something about, well, if I'm a singer, lots of people are going to be looking at me, lots of people are going to be watching me, criticizing me, critiquing me. So it could be about attention, but it could also be your judgment around what being a singer means, i.e. being a performer. So just start to question that. So obviously I'm using this example just to show you how it would work. So what do I have to step into to become a, whatever you said, a number one, but in this case, a singer? The mind, the ego mind, will usually come up with stories around money, time, and resources. And they're the things that usually hold people back. I don't have the time, don't have the money, I don't have the resources. Just know that the ego mind can only see lack and limitation. The higher mind, this truer part of ourselves, can only see opportunity and possibility. And actually, when we really put our mind to something, we really decide, okay, this is what I want to do. It is amazing what doors open up. Seemingly things fall from the sky to support us on that journey. And where previously there may have been a door, suddenly this door opens and someone's like, oh, I've got a friend that's, giving free singing lessons at the moment. Do you want to go and try? There's all these sort of doors that suddenly previously seemed shut that suddenly open. So just notice your mind. Does it come up with, I don't have the money, don't have the time, don't have the resources, I've got childcare to worry about, who's going to take care of the children? Just start to notice that, because that's the ego. The ego's lack and limitation. Question number 3. So what is the worst case scenario about what you wrote in number 2? So obviously that's going to look different depending on what you wrote in number 2. So you want to peel back the onion on that. So let's say that you said that I would be uncomfortable with the attention. I'd be uncomfortable with getting criticized, people watching me, people looking at me, people critiquing what I'm doing, what I'm wearing, blah, 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 blah. So what's the worst case scenario about that? What's so bad about people critiquing you or criticizing you? It sounds like a stupid question, but just keep peeling back the onion. Like, what is really at the heart of this? And obviously I can't tell you what it is for you, but often it's really about rejection, it's about abandonment, it's about people not liking us, people leaving us. It's usually around something like that. So you can see how far removed now it is from the original desire. It's like what started off as I could never sing is really about a fear of being rejected, fear of being abandoned, fear of dying alone, ultimately, which sounds a bit dramatic, but the ego is very dramatic. So then the final piece is, it's not enough to just intellectually get this. And this is where, again, I think a lot of the personal development world, and this is where I got stuck for many years too, you get so stuck in well, I understand why I do this because my mum did this and my dad did this and my brother did this, so this is why I do this. So you intellectually understand it, but you don't have the emotional piece. And you're not allowing yourself to feel the emotion. So it's really about feeling the emotion. And that's what, again, the ego freaks out. Anytime we have to feel uncomfortable things, it's like, no, this is dangerous. You can't feel this. So I'd invite you, even in just very small ways initially, if this is very uncomfortable for you, just to take yourself back to a time, or if you can think about it right now, using that example of being criticized, where you felt criticized, and allow those feelings to come into your body. Allow yourself to feel in your body what it felt to be criticized. So it might be tight chest, it might be the heart beating fast, it might be the stomach, the butterflies in the stomach, it might be a tight throat, whatever it is for you. Allow yourself to feel it and just allow it to be there with compassion, without buying into the stories that the ego is going to try and spin about why you feel this, and allow it to be there. And they say that it takes about 90 seconds for an emotion to pass. It's just most of the time we push it away within the first few seconds. So it just builds in energy. And then we think, oh, no, this is just too bad. So that's the steps. I mean, it's not going to be something you can do in 5 minutes. You do need to actually give yourself some real time to do this. But I really do encourage you to sit and do this. Create like half an hour for yourself to do this and allow yourself to go there. And you will probably have to do this a few times, and it might take you a while to really go through this. And just to note as well, we don't just have one shadow. we have multiple shadows and different things in our life, but there's usually one that has the sort of the biggest hook into us that often feeds into lots of areas in our life. So this was a much bigger video than my normal videos. I hope you found this really useful, and please let me know your thoughts, because I'd love to know how you go. And if you do actually do this exercise, I'd love to know how you go with that. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you on next week's video.